Hey everyone, Joshua Kirk here with you once again. Now it's time for episode 104 of Album of the Day. And, before we get to today's review, I do want to talk, a little bit about, some shows that I'm going to this weekend. I haven't been to concerts in a while, but I kind of just started, sort of consistently going to shows, this weekend. Which, last night, Friday night, I went to go see Eric Brace and Peter Cooper play at this this coffee shop, this coffee house and club in Vienna, Virginia called Jam and Java. The kind of music they play is sort of folky, Americana, sort of country sort of music, and they're playing a bunch of songs by DC bluegrass, musicians that, so some people may not be as familiar with. It is great. They are really good live with all the interesting stories that they're telling, and plus, of course, their voices sound really good together. And of course, they do write original songs, but their new album is full of covers of classic DC bluegrass musicians that obviously they're heavily influenced by. And tonight I'm going to see a concert that I have been waiting to go to for years. I'm going to see the Avett Brothers tonight at Pier 6 in Baltimore, and I'm really excited for that show. I have been just patiently waiting for a long time for an opportunity to go see the Avett Brothers live, because I'm a huge fan of their music, and, I've heard a lot of people say they're really good live, so I'm expecting I'm expecting one hell of a show tonight, since I hear they're, full of energy, because they're kind of folky, sort of country a little bit, but at the same time, they have a little bit of a punk rock attitude at times. I mean, especially on those older Avett's records, they definitely had a lot of energy, were just having fun with their music, especially with Seth screaming and them just jumping around, essentially. Yeah, on the newer stuff, they're not really jumping around as ferociously as they used to, but they're definitely one of my favorite bands, and I'm excited to see their live performance. So yeah, anyway, aside from this little preamble going on here for this intro, let's get on to the review. Today I'm here to review pretty much one of the most grandiose, eccentric, and weird singer-songwriters and multi-instrumentalists in music. Yes, I'm talking about the one and only, the eccentric, one of the most eccentric musicians of all time, Tom Waits. I have reviewed him a couple of years ago. I did a review of his album Rain Dogs, released in 1985. Still think that is a really good album. But I'm here to review what I've pretty much decided is probably my favorite Tom Waits album, which was released in 1983, his first on Island Records, and his first to have this kind of weird, artsy sound that he developed ever since signing with Island. And it's called Swordfishtrombones. I've been sort of planning to review this for a long time, but yet I've sort of been teasing for a while, but now I'm just now reviewing it. There are the songs there. 15 tracks on it. There's the disc. And these are the lyrics, of course. And of course I love the artwork on this. Very, very grandiose. Sort of fits in with the album itself. So yeah, that's my quick little demonstration on the very simple, sort of plain, but, that's the packaging for Swordfishtrombones. So yeah, back in the 70s, Tom Waits was kind of this bar hopping, cigar smoking piano guy. But in my opinion, he was probably less interesting then than he was in the 80s and the early 90s, when he developed this sort of grandiose, artsy, sort of, amusing, weird, sort of creepy sort of music. This album opens with the song Underground, which is kind of rhythmic and, has this sort of, has this sort of quiet little, like, marimba and horn, paired with a guitar and some drums and bass. And one thing you definitely notice is not just the weird, more daring, more sort of outlandish instrumentation, but also the vocals are different. Tom's voice is just getting more and more gruff on this album. I mean, he sounds as if he got ran over by a car and yet lived through it. And he comes in with these sort of, he comes in with these very interesting lyrics about how there's another world, underground while the real world is asleep. He really tells stories for his own amusement, but he's pretty dope at that, though. Then you get into Shore Leave, which shows him sort of talking, he's more just kind of, talking in the verses, but then sort of singing the chorus, to pair with this kind of, to pair with this creeping banjo, unsettling percussion, and, weird little, noises going around in the background. And weird little, screeching noises going on in the background, as well as kind of this, weird little, trombone blasts as he comes in with this story about, well, with buckshot eyes and a purple heart, I rolled down the National Stroll. Yeah, he comes in with this interesting story about, this man who is, somewhere in, he's, he sounds like he's in, he's, in sort of a Chinatown fair, he calls it, where he, rolls down the gutter to the blood bank, and, he's in bad need of a shave, and, and he, talks baseball with the lieutenant and stuff like that, and he writes a letter to his wife, saying, I miss you very much, as he's going through, he's definitely very poetic with, his lyrics in terms of how literal and how specific he is with what's happening. And at the end, he's just sort of, creating these sort of, and then at the end, he's just sort of creating these sort of, gruff sort of howls of Charlie. On there, he's where he's sort of it's definitely the one part where he, sounds pretty dramatic and, and probably, that's the one part where the vocal sounds really dramatic and really sounds as if he's being, as if he's being steamrolled or something like that. Next, you get into the track Dave the Butcher, which is definitely which is one of the instrumental tracks on here, where you get this kind of unsettling sort of organ pairing with these this sort of rumba, sort of bass drums in the background. It sounds like it could be some music for some sort of avant-garde horror film or something like that. Next you get into more straightforward melodic material with the song Johnsburg, Illinois, which, goes back to sort of his roots with just a piano, upright bass, and of course that voice and, lyrics about love and stuff like that. But I will admit that is still a pretty, nice bit of little light in the middle of this kind of dark, tortured sort of album that he's going for on here. The next track on here is called 16 Shells from a 30-06, which throws in these sort of, which throws in these kind of, which throws in like some clanging percussion as well as this sort of tom laden drum pattern as well as this din 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 little melody on a guitar and upright bass. Love how they sort of match together on here, as well as these sort of, sort of unexpected trombone sort of things. They just go around like in the background. And then of course Tom comes in with, again, some very amusing and interesting lyrics about like, about like beating a billy with a French horn, and like blowing a hole the size of a kick drum, and of course, and also like talking about driving an old kick mule crazy by like by like banging on strings. It's definitely a pretty interesting, definitely some pretty interesting stuff that he like talks about on there. And the next track on here is Town with No Cheer, which comes in with some really soothing, beautiful bagpipes at the beginning to pair with this ringing bell. And then of course it comes into the actual song, just kind of this somber sort of, more quiet. This is one of the quieter songs on the album, infusing together pipe organ with like some little synthesizer, with some little, quirky, but also kind of, sweet little like, like there's actually he actually uses a little bit of synthesizer on this track. And as he talks about sort of this town that is like, sort of, really low on who is like talking about this town where the people are sort of unable to quench their thirst, and they're just begging for like, water and stuff like that. But then there's this, but then of course there's this guy that lives there that obviously is, treating the people very cruel and deciding the canteens are no longer necessary, and it's all replaced by newfangled buffet cars and faster locomotives. There's so yeah, it's sort of, one of the more somber, more depressing sort of tracks on the album. You have this kind of, percussive, sort of weird sort of tune. Then after that, you get kind of this depressive sort of tune, showing that, this album isn't like a very like, like it is kind of, like this album definitely can be sort of an unsettling listen in a lot of different ways. The next track on here is one of my faves on the album, In the Neighborhood, which again sort of deals with a town that is just, has a bunch of terrible things going on, like the market burns down so the kids can't get ice cream, or, people have to sleep on the floors, and of course, and then Big Mambo is kicking his old greyhound, and there's always construction work that's bothering you there, and in this town you don't get your butter delivered anymore. To pair with this sort of marching band sort of instrumentation with the snare, with of course the snare drum and the big epic horns, as well as this little bit of organ as well. This is sort of a sad song, but at the same time, musically, it's a little sort of catchy and brings maybe a little light into the album, no matter how dark or, or depressing some of the lyrics can be. The next track on here is an instrumental called Just Another Sucker on the Vine, which throws in this really playful pipe organ paired with this little bit of trumpet bit. So again, it's kind of a little light to come in into this tortured sort of, very grandiose and weird album here. The next track is Frank's Wild Years, where Tom comes in with one of his most interesting monologues, where he talks about a man who, has a wife that makes good Bloody Marys, and he has a Chihuahua named Carlos who is totally blind because he had a skin disease. And of course he talks about how the guy came home from work one night, picked up a couple of drinks, and drank them on the car, and of course went to the house and torched the house by dousing it with gasoline, and he watches it burn all Halloween orange and chimney red. Then he puts on a radio station, and then he heads off, and you never could stand that dog. It's definitely one of the most dope sort of, dialogue sort of pieces that Tom has ever composed. I mean, yeah, this isn't necessarily a song, but it doesn't need to be. It's just kind of him just showing off some of his storytelling ability, to pair with some pretty straightforward instrumentation of just an organ and upright bass. So there's a little bit of a jazz feel to this track, which I think weirdly fits in with sort of the the monologue Tom that Mr. Waits is bringing us on this track. Then there's the sort of title track, Swordfishtrombone, which throws in this where we're given some marimba, some little hand drums, and a combination of electric and upright bass to make sort of a more islandy sort of tune, but at the same time still has a little bit of darkness to it. As Waits talks about this guy who, fought in the war and left with a party in his head, and and he heads out for California with a fly swatter banjo on his knee, and he goes to the sleep in 10 Killer Lake, comes up with all these different sort of, plans after when he's drinking half a pint of Ballantines every day, and stuff like that. So he after this kind of crazy war that he sort of fought in, his thoughts tend to go south a little bit in terms of what he is thinking about doing. So some people may think he's doing the obituary mumble, or that he's hanging on the wall or something like that. So yeah, it's definitely one of Tom Waits' best sort of stories going on here. This instrumental actually kind of reminds me of the song "Be Prepared" from the Disney movie The Lion King, only it's darker, and also this album came about 10 years before The Lion King came out to theaters. This is a comparison not a lot of people have done, but that's what it kind of sounds like to me. The next track on here is Down, 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 which is kind of a maybe little soulful in terms of the instrumentation, but not really in terms of the vocal and the lyrics. The lyrics talk about this, this person who is, who is a naughty man, and he always, tells lies, and he's guilty, and he's and he's chewing tobacco and drinking gin, and of course, he's, got the devil in his mind all the time, and so it's, sort of creepy, but at the same time, is a pretty legitimate story about guilt a little bit. The next track is, again, another more straightforward sort of melodic piano piece called Soldier's Things, which, where he talks about, how, where he mentions all the things that, a soldier packs up, and So and excuse me, and talking about how everything's kind of strangely $1 uh, uh, in the box, and he's talking about how it's how he kind of does it all for bravery, even when his boots are full of rocks. And then there's Gin Soaked Boy, which goes for this bluesy slide guitar based sort of tune. Tune on here. Tune where the lyrics are tune on here well, not really much to say about the lyrics there. And then you get into Trouble's Braids, which is kind of this stripped down little which has this kind of has this like reverb hand drum to pair with this kind of little snazzy upright bass there, to pair with Tom's sort of strange lyric, with Tom's sort of strange little lyrics. And the closer on here is Rainbirds, which is really nice. Again, kind of somber, but at the same time very beautiful piano piece on here. Which the intro has some weird sort of drony sounds provided via a glass harmonica. And that's sort of what closes the album. It's 15 songs, but it's only like 40 minutes, so it's actually kind of short for a 15-song album, but at the same time, it definitely is a very short but very interesting and very unique and this album, and this is just an album that has a lot of personality to it. I mean, pretty much every song on it has its own little personality to it. I mean, if I were to tell you what my favorite song on this album was, I'd have to say, I don't really have a favorite song on here. Really, every song on here pretty much, has something about it that makes it, very, very worthwhile. So, yeah, if you're looking for sort of a weird, sort of, dark and ominous sort of album that throws together a bunch of like avant-garde instrumentation with some very amusing and very clever storytelling, and if you're looking for an original voice, one that sounds a lot different from any other artist. It's pretty hard to find a voice like Tom Waits's. But I do recommend this album. But I definitely highly recommend this album to anyone who's looking for a unique album that has all that has that sort of, eccentric personality to them. Tom Waits is definitely truly an interesting character. Well, not just in his songs, but he's a pretty interesting character himself, pretty much. So yeah, if you're new to Tom Waits, I would recommend starting with this would probably be good. Or Rain Dogs is a great album. Frank's Wild Years is a good album as well. Mule Variations, another great album. I think, he's definitely had his career from like 1983 when he released this album to like just recently when he released Bad As Me in 2011. Since then, he's had a pretty interesting career. So, yeah, that's not really much more to say there. But yeah, that's my review of Swordfishtrombones. I think, I'm not sure, I think this may be his 6th album or something like that, I'm not sure, but yeah, that's my review of the album, and I'll see you for episode 105.